Welcome back, everyone. Thank you for joining the session on Building Back Better, the economic and social value of female founders in a post-pandemic world. Please do post any questions you have for our panelists throughout the session. Now, I'm overjoyed to introduce to you our chair for the session, Avril Lewis, Managing Director for Technology Connected. Avril's background is in the semiconductor industry, and she was awarded an MBE for services to the technology industry in Wales in 2018. Avril is an influential and energetic leader with highly developed communication and interpersonal skills and thrives as a catalyst for change. Welcome, Avril.
Thank you very much indeed, Siwan, and a very warm welcome. Good afternoon. I'm delighted to be able to chair this afternoon session for International Women's Day, Building Back Better, the economic and social value of female founders post-pandemic. As Siwan said, I'm Avril Lewis, Managing Director of Technology Connected, the network for the technology industry in Wales. Technology Connected unifies, champions and promotes Welsh technology across the globe. The industry has approximately 40,000 people employed in over 3,500 organisations in Wales, and is a significant contributor to the Welsh economy. We at Technology, we connect people, industries, technologies, and the next generation. And if you'd have told me 12 months ago that my whole business operating model and my family circumstances would need to change literally overnight, I probably would have said that it wouldn't have been possible. But as we know, the pandemic threw us many challenges, both professionally and personally. We have, however, adapted, and technology has been a key enabler. It has been able to facilitate our ability to work from home. It's been absolutely essential in keeping our children educated online. And perhaps most importantly, it's been able to allow us to stay in touch with our loved ones. COVID-19 has also created opportunities, many opportunities for entrepreneurs, those with vision, ideas, and creativity that can rebuild our economy and society back better than before. And I'm so excited to be chairing what I'm confident will be an insightful, informative, and inspiring discussion this afternoon. And I'm delighted to be joined by my esteemed panel of guests. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome and introduce to you Priya Guha, Venture Partner for Meridian Ventures. Priya is the venture partner at Meridian Ventures, investing in women-led innovation, a member of the Innovate UK Council, non-exec director at the Digital Catapult, and adjunct faculty at the Ashridge Hult Business School. Priya was recently named in the 2020 Top 50 Most Influential Women in Technology for the third year running. Very warm welcome to you, Priya. I'm also joined this afternoon by Sarah Henley, who's co-founder and COO of Next Up Comedy. Sarah is founder of Next Up Comedy, a streaming platform for live comedy. Next Up launched 4 years ago with the aim of showcasing the UK's incredible wealth of comedy talent to a global audience. Esther Zibor, principal researcher from Nesta's Innovation Growth Lab. And Esther's a principal researcher at Nesta. She designs and supports experiments to inform innovation and entrepreneurship support policy, often with a focus on advancing equality, diversity, and inclusion. And she's passionate about generating high quality, casual evidence to support policy making and about sharing academic findings with the wider audience. So welcome, Esther. And finally, certainly not last but least, as they say, or least but last, Sonia Barlow, founder of LMF Network. Very warm welcome, Sonia. Sonia is an award-winning entrepreneur, founder of the LMF Network, diversity, business coach, and motivational speaker. Her efforts are focused on bridging the skills gap and creating inclusive cultures. In 2020, she was named as one of the most influential women in tech and is soon to be a published author, sharing her debut handbook on entrepreneurship, business, and becoming your own boss. I am delighted to have you all with us here this afternoon. a very warm welcome. And first and foremost, I do have to say many congratulations to Sarah, who I understand was one of the award winners this morning. So very well indeed to you, Sarah.
Thank you.
As we move into our discussion this afternoon, I have, as you can see, given you a very, very brief introduction. Please, when I come to ask you a question, if you would like to introduce yourself more, say a little bit more about yourself. We'd be delighted to hear that. So, without any further ado, lots to cover this afternoon and some fascinating insight that I'd like to start with. So, understanding where we are, hopefully we are coming through it and we're coming out the other end, but we understand it's had a significant effect on our businesses. So, Sarah, if I may come to you first, and I'm going to follow up with Sonia, if I may, please can you just give us your experience of the last 12 months of, how your business has been impacted by COVID, and more importantly, what you've had to do to be able to survive and probably continue and pivot through this period of the last 12 months.
Of course, yeah. So it was definitely a big shock to the system when the nation shut down overnight. We are a comedy subscription video platform that supports and champions live comedy. So we work in the realm of normally recorded live comedy. So we had a lot of productions lined up, lots of gigs to film. And our life was in the clubs. So they all shut overnight. Comedians completely lost all of their revenue, which was really hard, and definitely impacted diversity, because the clubs are often where you see a much wider range of comedians than you do on the TV for now. And everything completely closed. So we had to move quite quickly. All of our team went home, all of our productions were cancelled. And we applied actually for an Innovate grant, one of the COVID rapid response grants, to run a digital festival in July from comedians' homes, which was every single night of the month. It was sort of in response to Edinburgh being shut down, and a way to pay comedians to do what they do best, which is to perform. So that went really brilliantly. And we also set up a Just Giving fund for comedians, and we raised over £120,000, which we gave out in hardship grants to the comics who were most affected by the fact that they lost their income. And then, the July festival led us on to really thinking about live streaming, because previously we'd worked in recorded content, and that wasn't going to work because we couldn't go to anyone's houses and record any content. So we quickly pivoted and looked into live streaming, and we've since done 3 further festivals, including Leicester, which is the UK's biggest soul comedy festival, and the Women in Innovation Award, which we were really excited to win, is going to help us digitize UK comedy clubs. So we'll be taking cameras and streaming technology into the clubs and streaming that into people's homes, which should help with accessibility. And we're going to really encourage diversity in the lineups as well. And so we've moved from recorded to live. We'll obviously do recorded as well, but it's been a big shift at a challenging time.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed. I am just picking up on that point. We normally do great big award ceremonies, and of course we couldn't do that last year. So we literally just created something called Wales Tech Week in about 5 weeks. And it was phenomenally successful, which was really quite surprising considering the amount of time we had to be able to pivot. I think we did it all in about 5 weeks with 100 events across the week. It was crazy. But I think at the time, that's what the pandemic has done, is it's made us so agile and so dynamic. We have. And particularly, I think, many of us who are multitasking lots of different roles, to be able to do that has been quite phenomenal. Thank you ever so much indeed for that, and many congratulations. And I really look forward to seeing what you're able to do with that Innovation Award as we move forward. Sonia, can I come to you? Because, I know you've done an awful lot of live events. How has that, the pandemic, affected you and your business in the last 12 months?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So really inspired by Sarah's story. And I definitely echo your point. I think the pandemic has made us more agile and aware of what waste is, and waste being resources, time, effort, money, and even kind of working concepts. But if I give you just a kind of brief context, I started my network as no more than a brunch club in 2018, and ironically, no one showed up to brunch, so it wasn't successful by any means. And it was Jan 2020 when we started thinking of it as a side hustle, and Jan 2019 and Jan 2020 when I decided that I was going to launch it into a business. So 3 months before COVID, I'm this kind of just come out of corporate world, really excited to launch this like business that I thought was going to work. And then the pandemic hit. So March this time last year, 75% of my income was wiped out overnight, basically. And I had no income April, May, or June. One, because due to the fact that I was a new business director or company director, I wasn't eligible for any funding, and to this extent and to this point, I'm not. Second, because I initially assumed that the LMF network was going to be a profit-making company, which thanks to the pandemic, I soon realized it wasn't. So we're not for-profit social enterprise. And so I started my own business and diversity consultancy. But third, and most importantly, because I'd never filled out a grant in my life and had no idea how to start. So the pandemic, I definitely think in kind of, this time 12 months ago, I've been upskilled, I've been educated, I've realized my own biases and my own uncertainties in a lot of places that exist. I'm a big champion of diversity and inclusion because one of the reasons I left the corporate world is because I was bullied in the workplace, and I wrote for the Telegraph last week just on that exact point. I believe in building better communities, and hence why we have the LMF network. But to your point and Sarah's point, I freaked out. I'm not going to lie. I spent half of April in my bed, cuddled, being like, what's just happened? And the rest of April, we had a minimum of 21 webinars. We upskilled over 900 people in 3 weeks, designed and delivered all for free. And by the end of April, I already gone through burnout number 1 because you panicked. And in May, I woke up and I was like, what's the worst thing can happen? So I started a podcast called Strategically Winging It, because I think that's what most of us are doing. And fortunately, by summer, that was picked up by a publisher. And so now my book, Unprepared to Entrepreneur, which as per the title, I wasn't prepared, and most of us aren't, and most of us weren't, is now available on Amazon. So I guess to answer your question, I'm very grateful that the pandemic reminded us, taught us, reassured us that we can work from anywhere. We can diversify the working pool by making sure that we're going outside of London, zone 1 to 4, reminding us to direct our skills with the work that we're doing, and bringing a spotlight on issues like mental health, wellness in the workplace, flexible working, diversity, inclusion. But at the same time, I've also realized that a lot of people are impacted as per the numbers, but also if you think about young professionals today who may want to start a business, who may want to go into the corporate world. And so we launched the UK's largest mentoring program, for which KTN are actually one of our partners. So we have been able to take on 700 people across a 6-month program across 14 countries on career acceleration, career transitioning, and upskilling them, fundamentally because if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's that people are lacking confidence, career opportunities, and capability, not because they don't have them, but because a lot of us have been kind of broken down. We don't know what's happening. We're confused. We're unsure. There's a lot of uncertainty. So yes, it has been life-changing, and yes, I've pivoted, and I definitely think pivoted is the one word I really don't like to use, but I guess that's what's happened just because it was the buzzword, let's say. But what it's taught me is we need to think about the 3 C's. The first being our own care. I have to admit that I didn't put that much spotlight onto it as much as I did now. The second being community. I think community is so important. Working with community, building a community, having a safe space of people around you. And the third is culture. And culture being, what do you want your workplace and your workforce to look like? And equally, what kind of culture do you want to be associated with? So yes, it was difficult, and it was terrible. But I definitely think it's helping us in our evolution of business, of economy, and and reminding us, especially on International Women's Day, that the inequalities still exist, and we must do something practical to and pledge to change them, not just, you know, launch another social campaign, which isn't going to work.
Sure. Thank you very much indeed, Sonia. Some very interesting points there that I would like to pick up on some of them, if I may. Just going through that, I mean, the pandemic, you know, it has shown in many ways that the world is quite a small place. You know, the technology has allowed us to connect, and, you know, particularly, you know, the whole issue of globalization and sustainability and how much stuff, you know, our carbon footprint, you know, I think the pandemic has really given us an opportunity to, you know, to look at the reset button in lots and lots of different ways. And understanding, you know, on International Women's Day, I've seen a report this morning that's just come out that said, you know, that women have been, you know, most severely affected by the pandemic. You know, I have a esteemed group of people here. You, I'm sure, have got many insights and many ideas on what it is that we can be doing to, you know, to be able to build that better. But I'd really like to get your thoughts, if I may, on, you know, what has happened in the last 12 months with regard to the gender balance, the fact that everybody is now working from home. And these are thoughts that I have. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I'm a single parent. I think the dog is in the crate and my son is in the schoolroom. And I hope that's the way it currently is. It might be the wrong way around, but that's the way I hope it is. You know, we've seen many people having to work at home as families. And what it's indicated to me more than anything is, why do we have to have a 9 to 5? You know, I've always worked on measure me on my output, not on my input. Now, if we've got families managing to work, you know, from home together, you know, with both partners, why can't we create more opportunities, you know, for greater equality, greater diversity, and greater inclusivity in our working schedules? So I'm going to throw that out, if I may, please, to Esther, because I think you've done a lot of work in research with how the pandemic has been affecting equality, inclusivity, and diversity. Can I throw that to you just to get your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. And I'm also really grateful for the stories from Sarah and Sonia, exactly because a lot of the time the research that I do approaches these questions on the aggregate. You know, looking at the numbers, the statistics, the trends, and it's so easy to lose sight of how that impacts the individual. What is the story behind those numbers? So, you know, when we read about the number of businesses that have pivoted, you know, how many months spent cuddled in the bed because this is just all too much is behind that. I'm really, really grateful to kind of have both of that shared in this space. So I think it's a really interesting time for women in the workforce and also for women in entrepreneurship, because on the one hand, like you mentioned, we actually now have a chance to rethink this idea that we need to be in this physical space doing work in the office together at the same time. There's more chance to actually contribute from home, more chance to do like asynchronous collaborations. So that should make it easier for women who tend to still bear the brunt of housework, of caring responsibilities, of all the unpaid work. And at the same time, what I've seen in terms of numbers, like what has this pandemic done to women? Well, it has predominantly hit sectors where women are active. It has also led to a decrease in the relative productivity of female innovators and scientists, because while, you know, in traditional, you know, two-parent heterosexual households, even if both parents are home, it tended to be the woman who would actually be saddled with all kinds of caring responsibilities and all the unpaid work. So amazing numbers coming out of the research sector, looking at how lockdown made men a lot more productive, and then women are falling behind, their careers at risk. So it feels like such an interesting and important time to recognize this, because Avril, like you said, this is the time to rethink things. But if we allow kind of the traditional gender norms of the way we do things to prevail, then this actually will make things worse for us, not better. So I would be really excited to see exactly solutions on culture, on, you know, how do we think about our place, our contribution to the world of business, but to society as a whole, so that we don't fall into those traps. Sarah, you look like you might have something to add.
Yeah, what you were just saying actually rang really true for me. When we first got locked down, I have a 2.5-year-old, who's now 3.5, and he was like a wild animal, and being locked in with him actually made it a lot more difficult, because whilst my husband's an actor, so his whole career was down the pan as well, he was very willing to do the childcare. But you try explaining that to a 2.5-year-old who's like smashing down your door and ripping his clothes off and smearing chocolate everywhere, and it's very difficult. So I think sometimes those lines and boundaries are really important. And in my team, I also witnessed the fact that because people were locked in their homes, they didn't have evening plans and that sort of thing, the men and the young guys would work all day and all the way into the evening, whereby by the evening I was like an absolute wreck. So I think the whilst the idea of that, having that flexibility to potentially go and do the school run with earlier kids and then come back and work a bit later is amazing, I think it depends on the age of the children and the parent they're going for, and it's not necessarily that the man's not trying to pull his weight. It's sometimes just the virtue of the situation and being in sort of cramped accommodation as well.
And
if I can just pick up on that, Avril, I think
yes.
You know, what Sarah and Esther are saying there is so true. I think if we go back to that sort of very stratospheric level, you've seen two trends during the pandemic. One is the leveling trend, as you said in your introductory comments there, you know, the opportunity for different types of working potentially, the opportunity for it not to matter so much whether you're living in London, as Sonia was saying, or whether you're living in another part of the country, to be able to sort of participate in the way that you've perhaps been excluded from in the past. But the flip side, and I think this is the really telling one, is that, you know, it has really exposed a lot of the inequities that were there already. It's not new that women have had disproportionately the dominant share of the caring responsibilities, but that's been exacerbated because of the pandemic. It's not new that from an academic perspective, female academics, female researchers have historically published disproportionately less to male peers. But what's happened during the pandemic is that trend has been very much exacerbated, as Esther was saying. So I think for me, what this creates is an environment where we need as a society to step back and recognize that this inequity is there. It's not going to resolve itself by some sort of subconscious evolution of where we are as a society. It's not done that over decades. It's not going to do that now. So we all, in terms of this Building Back Better agenda, need to recognize that this isn't just about ensuring that we have economic growth and that the Chancellor's budget statements are created to ensure an objective economic growth. It's about us actually making sure that economic growth is an inclusive growth, whether that's looked through the prism of gender, from minority communities in the UK, from a regional agenda. We need to have a different type of economic growth post-pandemic that ensures we're not going to be in this position ever again.
Absolutely agree with you entirely. And, you know, we cannot go forward the way we have been in the past, without a doubt. You know, people talk about a new normal. I looked at the definition of new normal. Normal means typical and predictable. You know, the one thing that we know right now is the future is going to be atypical and unexpected. And, you know, we need to be building the skills, the resilience, and the aptitudes to be able to deal with that. And I think the points you make, Priya, absolutely endorse. I'll throw the question back. What ideas, what suggestions do we have, having been through this, being in the roles that we have? You know, let's open up this debate. Let's throw these ideas about as to what do we think needs to be done. You know, what can we do as individuals? what do we do as women? What do we do for inclusivity? But, this world isn't all about women. We have to look at how do we work and ensure that we get that equality. All we want is a level playing field, as LaShawn Lindsay always says. So I'm going to throw that back, if I may. What suggestions do we have on what is it, if we could stand in front of the Chancellor and say to him today? Priya, I'm going to leave that one to you.
I have one that I think is fundamental, which is if people have been following the debate around the underinvestment that goes into female founders, they may be struck to realise that actually, when we try to look at similar data for Black founders in the UK, the data didn't even exist because we weren't tracking it. There's now some great organisations like Extend VC who've come in to try and redress that imbalance of data. But for me, data is fundamental, because if you don't know the extent of the problem and you're not tracking how that problem evolves and you're not tracking how your interventions impact the data, then we're never going to understand long-term how we turn this around. And I think in terms of concrete initiatives and concrete suggestions, once you get that data, there also then is an opportunity to actually make some of your interventions accelerate that change. So let me give you a very concrete example. If you look at the government's interventions that they've done during COVID-19, if we look at those that are specifically designed to support businesses and support business innovation, why should we not have those grants designed to be going to an aspirational target of people based on the breakup of the UK? So we would set an aspirational target, for example, that 50% goes to women, or even 30%, which wouldn't be unfair in this day and age, that a certain proportion should go to minority founders. I'm not saying that, people, the money should be held back because of not achieving 1 percentage point here or there. But the reality is, if it's not measured, nobody cares, particularly when you're running around trying to respond across the board to all of the things that society's had to respond to during the pandemic. So for me, a very concrete suggestion is that interventions made by the government using taxpayers' money should have aspirational targets set against them that are measured, that are addressed, and they're linked to how people see the performance of those interventions.
Absolutely. I am. That is fascinating that, you mentioned that it wasn't even being recorded or measured. When any business, if you don't measure it, how can you improve it? That's, absolutely astounding. If I may, can I stay with you, Priya, a moment? Because I'd like to get an understanding of the impact on, investment during pandemic, particularly for the groups that we're talking about today. How have we seen that affected in the last 12 months?
So I think you're seeing those two dynamics at play that I talked about with regard to the pandemic as a whole. On one front, actually, this should be a leveler for the ability for companies to get investment, because you don't have to be knocking on the door of an investor in London or even sort of in Sand Hill Road in San Francisco, where I used to work. You actually should be able to access investors across the world through Zoom, through another platform, and have that sort of a leveled interaction. But the reality is, what this has exposed in worlds like investment, and as in lots of other different sectors, is that there is a very closed community operating. And if you're not part of the inside of that closed community, it's really hard to be able to get access to have that conversation in the first place, to get that qualified introduction that helps you get through the door to the investor. So there's been some fantastic organizations that have stepped up to this challenge. Diversity VC is one that I would flag in this conversation, who've actually tried to say, well, actually, what can we do to change that dynamic, to give people the advantage of this more level playing field by opening up these historically closed networks like investment. And I think that has been the positive light that's come out of this. But the reality is the pandemic has hit so many businesses hard. You know, we've heard two really, really amazing stories from Sarah and Sonia, and I'm sure we'll hear many more during the day. And actually, we need to make sure that where we have fantastic British innovation businesses, that they get the investment they need to thrive, and everything needs to be put behind creating an environment, whether that's grants, whether that's loans, whether that's private capital, to ensure those businesses can thrive and succeed.
May I jump in here?
Of course.
On the flip side, so we're talking about investment and kind of the funding. In 2020 alone, I have designed and delivered over 200 diversity inclusion workshops, and a large majority of them being to VC funds. What I'm seeing from the other side is our biases are coming to light, which we didn't even recognize. So an example being, I have given inclusive workshops to VC funds, and I would say 8 out of 10 times, the feedback is, or someone has put their hand up, and most of the times these are also women, right? Who put their hand up and saying, when a woman comes and asks for funding, the first thing we think about is if she has a partner, wants a partner, is going to get pregnant, is going to have a child. These biases are still within us. So what are we doing to change those? The second thing being that when we're going for investment, we're going for funding, a lot of our stats, and go back to Priya's data point, is around those who want to go down that route. The thing is, there are different forms of entrepreneurship. I'm a social entrepreneur, I've bootstrapped, but unfortunately there's not a lot of models out there for me, and a lot of people are not interested in our data because we aren't, quote unquote, the style of entrepreneurs that people are now collecting or researching on. So if you are a female founder, but you've chosen to bootstrap, or you've chosen to gain partners or apply for grants or use your savings, you're not deemed as an entrepreneur, and so you don't fit into that data point. The third point then, therefore, being is, to answer your question, Avril, we need to change our measures of success and the definitions that we hold around business, around entrepreneurship, around working lifestyles, for example. Exactly to your point, the sun's coming out. When the sun came out last week in London, I didn't want to work 1 to 4. I wanted to go out because we haven't felt the sun in ages. But did that stop me from doing my work? Absolutely not. You just shuffled. So the point is that if companies, and this is a reality, is if companies are trying to attract young professionals, and I mean both by experience, by age, the new generation of talent, the new generation is fluid, they're value-led, they want to work from anywhere and everywhere because they can get the work done. What they don't want is, they don't want micromanagement. They don't want to be reprimanded because they've picked a different alternative route versus the one that we're capturing data on. And most importantly, they don't want to work a 9 to 5 because, if anything, you know, to Sarah's point, everyone has lives that we don't know about. And outside of that, it's not just parents and lives. Last year, I personally was actually not told off, but someone didn't take me seriously because I had a virtual background on Zoom. I had a virtual background because I had 8 people in my house and a dog. And it was a 3-bed, and I was sitting on my bed, right? So the point is, we need to become more humane and more human as people, to understand everyone is going through a different experience. Your experience is not the same as mine. So at what point am I not capturing your experience, and maybe I should just have a conversation? A couple of weeks ago, I put on Twitter as a joke, and I was like, I think we should be limited to like 10 emails a day. Because the other problem is, because of the pandemic, we're used to this like instant email, instant gratification, instant replies, instant work. So our productivity has increased as well as the demand, but we've done that to ourselves. No one else is to blame, right? We need to take a step back and think, what is our measure of success? What does the future of business look like versus our capacity to get work done versus what work actually needs to be done? And then how are we making inclusive and accessible changes, taking into account everyone, not just the few data points that exist? And I mean, I'm not even going to talk about the Chancellor's budget or what he's doing for directors, because I'm personally so frustrated that after paying 10 years of tax, and out of all respect, having to now pay for people to be on furlough, I have received absolutely no funding in the last year as a new business owner versus us saying we need to get more ethnic minorities and women in business. Here I am ticking both boxes, but you're not helping me. So there's a lot of systematic policy changes that need to happen that actually come from us assessing what do we want from the future, and making sure that we can direct that change.
Avril, may
Thank
I
you.
just come back on this point around investment, because I think the reality is, and it's worth just maybe touching on this in this conversation, is that this isn't something that's just related to the pandemic.
No.
You know, the biases that Sonia just referred to there were there before the pandemic. The inequities in funding, we all know the Rose report that talks about 1 pence in every pound going to female founders, the equivalent stat now for Black founders in the UK, 0.24%. I mean, just ridiculously low amounts of private capital funding going into diverse businesses. The important thing for me is to remember why this matters. And for me, at least, this isn't just because it's the right thing to do. You know, I think at a group like ourselves, we definitely say, yes, this is the right thing to do. It's because if we don't think about diverse businesses, we're losing out on a number of counts. One, we cannot have design that doesn't include inclusion at its core. We need to have products that are designed for women, for minorities, for everybody in the UK and globally. Why does that matter? Both because obviously you can have catastrophic results if things aren't designed with an inclusive population in mind, but also because of the market opportunity. Actually, the reality is the market is made of 51% women. So hold on a second, if you're not thinking about products that are targeted at that market, you're missing out on potential scale. And this is why, you know, for Merriam Ventures, the company that I work with, they invest in female-led deep technology innovation. Why do we invest in that, you know, rather niche sector? Because of the potential, because these companies, we firmly believe, will outperform other businesses, because they are thinking about potential in the round and are making sure that we're not replicating the mistakes that society has historically made in terms of designing without inclusivity at the heart. And that, for me, is fundamental about how we think about this Building Back Better agenda.
Absolutely. Can Esther, did you want to come in there? Sorry, did you want to say something?
Yes, I thought I would pick up on something that Sonia mentioned, because I thought it was fascinating. You used the word taken seriously. And I thought that is something we need to be talking about. Are women taken seriously? Are innovators, founders who don't look like the stereotypical image of, you know, middle-aged white men? This idea that they are not taken seriously, and then what can we do about it? And I thought it was fascinating what you said, that it would sometimes be the women who would regard other women that way. And that is really sad, because it messes with this assumption of mine that we just need some women in positions of power and that is going to solve it. We just need to let women make decisions, and that is the way to tackle the bias, because clearly we are seeing that that alone is not enough. So in a way, if we don't change these embedded, you know, these cultural assumptions around what we think women are ultimately motivated to do, and it won't be enough to just say, oh, fine, we actually have now a woman on the board, especially when it's like these really tokenistic, you know, ways of representation of, oh, great, we are no longer 100% men. So I guess I was just wondering, what do we do? What do you think? What do you all think we do then? So if it's not just around putting women in positions of power, especially not just, you know, the one. So what do you think? What would you find useful?
For me personally, I have to come back and agree with Priya. You know, what the pandemic hasn't created a new situation. It has, if anything, just really put the spotlight on what has been a situation for many years. What it also does, though, is because of building out of the pandemic, we are going to have to be far more innovative and far more clever. And, you know, investment will be looking at where they see the opportunities for what are going to solve future problems. You know, and I think the reasoning has gone that, it used to be if you were in that particular field, you would only be innovative in that particular field. What this has done is it's thrown up, it's opened the doors for people to look at what are the solutions that they would never have dreamed of. And I think that's really where I'm keen to ensure that, by ensuring that we've got complete inclusivity and diversity, and equality, that everybody gets a fair chance at being able to understand those opportunities and being able to, be part of the solution. Because, if we don't have those, if we are not inclusive, we are missing a trick. That to me is absolutely fundamental. And, the last thing we want is tokenism. What we want is proper equality that produces the opportunities, that produces the results, which give us a much better quality of society, and a better, more productive for all, economy in which we live and society in which we live. Do I fancy the thought of ever spending 3 hours commuting again? No, thank you. But do I look forward to getting out and actually seeing somebody face to face and shaking their hand as opposed to Zoom waving? Bet your bottom dollar I do. So, we have got huge opportunities. It's putting down and making sure that our voices and all of our voices are heard in the right circles to be able to be putting these ideas forward. I'm very conscious, Sarah, I need to bring you in because I think you've got lots of ideas here, particularly, with the partner, with the young child, and, in an industry that has been most severely hit by this.
Yeah, I had something to add there, which I think maybe it's blind hope and optimism, or maybe it's maybe it's real. But I feel like what you were saying, Avril, about the tokenism being a problem, has been a massive problem in comedy for a long time. You see one woman on a lineup, you might see one not white person on a lineup, and they consider that job done. And I think that causes a lot of the sort of like internalized misogyny in these women who feel like they're competing for one spot because there aren't enough spots. And I think that happens in business to a degree as well. And certainly what I've noticed since being locked in was, at the beginning, I was very much get the child out. I pitched for investment for my company when I was heavily pregnant and nobody knew about it, because I felt the weight of those sorts of thoughts on me, like, what are they going to think? They won't trust me to run a business when I'm having a baby. And I've actually had a baby 4 weeks ago. Which a lot of people didn't see because they just saw the top of my head, but because of Zoom. But for the first few months, I was very much like, shut the door, try and be professional, keep it all smart. But then all the walls came down, and I think that happened to a lot of people. And I do wonder whether the pandemic's made us all a bit more human. So instead of being like, no, I'm a woman, I can do it, I can shut the door, but those other women probably can't, and they probably got kids and they probably got to do the school run, but I've sorted myself out. So no, I think we're all in a mess. Everyone can see everyone else's mess. And maybe that is quite a nice and vulnerable starting point to go into these job interviews. Like Sonia was saying, young people don't see those things as boundaries in the same way. So they walk in, they're like, what have you got to offer me? I need space to care for my child. I need this and I need that. And I want flexibility. And I think hopefully all of us have seen what an absolute rubbish situation we were in before with the 9 to 5 and the commute and trying to keep a lid on it all, that maybe now we can actually have an honest conversation about what do different people need and how can we accommodate that in the workplace to get the best out of people.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And I just want to build on that, and I'll come to prayer if I may. Just, I work in the tech industry, and there is a worldwide shortage of technical talent, and there has been for many a year. And as technology is so ubiquitous these days, the demand is only going to increase. So, it's not a question of, who can we employ? It's a question of how do I portray myself as an employer? What is my what is my employee value proposition to be able to say that I have to attract you to come and work for me? And we know now people aren't going to want to do the traditional, the whole idea of flexibility, the whole idea of, having time with the children, what time you come to work, what time, well, not even come to work, can you work from home? How are you going to look after me? How can I develop my career? How can I work in this environment? I want to be able to go and do this. Employers have got to be, far, far more astute in recognizing and being able to put in those opportunities to attract that talent. And I see, and I'm going to come to Priya before I come back to Sonia, I think investors are going to have to go that way as well.
Oh, I mean, 100%. Maybe a couple of different comments I'd make. One of them picking up very much on what Sarah said. I mean, I think the reality is that a virtual working environment has meant that managers all over the world have had to adapt their style of working to actually recognize that the old ways of working, the sort of in-office physical hierarchies that you get from, parodied on shows like The Office, they just won't work anymore. And I think the only companies and leaders that will thrive are the leaders that can recognize that EQ is just as important as IQ in the modern workplace. I've got a great example of your point there, Avril, about how you change that dynamic about the workplace and attracting people into the workplace. I have one of my hats across the ecosystem is as an advisor for a company called Chiron Medical Technologies. They use artificial intelligence for cancer detection. And one of the things that's incredibly powerful, and time again, we hear people who come into that business talking about this is, yes, it's, a very, very interesting technology to work on, but actually what inspires people is the mission. If you have the opportunity to make a difference to something that affects so many of our lives, like breast cancer, that's an incredibly powerful mission. And me as, a technologist, whether you're a male or a female, that is something that will bring me into that company. And I think there is something there to your point about how can companies pivot that dynamic, change that power hierarchy, and actually say, well, I want you to work with me. I want to invest in you. So therefore, I'm going to be the best I can be and actually aspire to have the vision and values that you'll align with in order to incentivize you to come alongside me. And that's a really, really powerful shift. I think that will be a very positive change for the future.
I'm going to pick up on that because we know, we've talked about the potential reset button. We're all thinking, far more. I mean, one thing pandemic has done is made us far closer in our communities, far more caring as a society, on the whole. We still have a lot of issues. Let's not detract from that. But it has brought us, far more neighbourly, far more community-based, far more caring in looking after one another. And Sonia's point about trying to look after ourselves,
Well, Sonia's just got a cup of tea, so she's clearly doing well over there.
But she's forgotten us. So just looking at, how do we build back a better society? How can we use our female intuition, our female ingenuity? How can we use those skills that we have, those natural abilities that we have? How can we make the most of those to be working with our colleagues across, all genders? How can we look at giving those opportunities? How can we capture those? What mechanisms do we need to use? Sonia, you've got your hand up on that.
This is like my favorite topic in the whole wide world. I don't think you understand. It's like everything that I live and breathe and dream right now. So I'm super excited. The first thing I want to say, yes, hot water bottle tea. I think we have to stop apologizing for things that are happening. I'm very blessed. I have a great partner. I'm clearly not feeling the greatest. before I used to be like, oh, I'm online and get something. Now it's like, if my niece runs, if the partner comes, it's fine because everyone's working from home. So I think we need to stop, apologizing for having. I don't have a child, but my brother does, and he's the one who taught me this. And he's like, he works from home, and I go, what do you do when your child cries? He goes, I tell my client I'm going to bring them back because my child's my priority. And that energy is what we need, absolutely. But to answer your question, the LMF network did research on this. So we have a social paper that's come out on social mobility. And we found that young professionals, especially, there's 5 things that are limiting them or they feel they're lacking in to go for the opportunity. Not that the talent pipeline doesn't exist, but they feel like they can't go. 1 being negotiation skills, 2 being confidence imposter syndrome, and 3 being what careers even exist, right? So we work in tech. When you work somewhere, you know things. And it's like, remember your first day at the job role? If I said to you what an OKR is or a KPI, you'd be like, I have no idea what those mean. But today, those are second language. And so often we forget that people that are coming into the ecosystem don't actually know what the roles are, what the day-to-days look like, what the skills are. We just throw in job titles like data scientist or delivery manager, not really explaining. The second being, when it comes to hiring recruitment practices, we need to come out of, and I say it all the time, we need to come out of this like zone 1 to 4 London bubble that everyone lives in. There is a world big and beyond. Work with, this is the time to work with universities and the educational institutes. For any company who is crying about not having the talent, what are you doing to help the organizations that are actually impacted? Young people are impacted. They are the ones who are going to have to fix the country, and we haven't given them the time or the effort that they need or they deserve back. Work with them. Diversify your talent pool, meaning go out of your top 10 that you already work with. Think about making accessible applications now. Take off people's names because that has biases. Take off their education that has biases. But also, if there's a spelling mistake or if something's wrong, don't automatically think they can't spell. Think they might have dyslexia. We have an amazing intern. She's dyslexic. She was, 3 out of 3 companies she applied for, they said, we will give you a guaranteed interview if you share your disability. She did. They didn't get back to her. That's the kind of things that are happening with companies. The third thing being, going back to what can we do and tone our skill sets? We're having to deal with a diverse, if we talk UK specifically, the diversity of the UK population and who make up the UK is expanding, it's growing. But what that means is you also have a lot of first and second generation talent and young people. So you're not just having to educate them, you're having to educate your families, educate the people that help them make these decisions. I come from a South Asian family. To this day, anything that we do is in a family group chat. And we're like, are we allowed to do it? Are we not allowed to do it? What does everyone think about this? Is this okay? When I started working in technology, I had to basically build a business case to my dad. Like, I'm going to go and be a consultant, which means I'm going to do this and that. You take people on this journey, what companies are doing and they're getting wrong. And I know because I work with them, is they're working with recruitment partners or they're working with organizations that don't understand. And it goes back to Priya's point about why representation matters. It's because your marketplace is different now. You're not having to just educate one person, but it's bringing the whole family or friendship group and convincing them that this is the right role because they can go somewhere else. And that's why what we can do is we can give back. The experience we have, panels like this is amazing because obviously it's streamed and anyone and everyone can attend. Mentoring is so key. If majority of the organizations make up or are made up of white middle-aged men, as a general statement, those same people are mentoring people that look and feel like them. And so they're not going to be able to accessible or kind of, have the talent or kind of give back in the way that needs to be. And lastly, and foremost, and this is a personal kind of, pledges, we need to stop applauding businesses that are like 1, 2, 3%, have increased by 1 or 2 or 3%. Personally, for me, 1% of 100 is 1. If it's taken you 5 years to increase 1%, I'm not going to give you a brownie point. Come on. Like, you can't do that anymore. I don't need any more panels of like how to get more women into STEM. I'll tell you, you work with communities, you donate, you pledge, you branch out, you make it accessible. You don't have another panel where we're talking about the same thing. only for you to do nothing different. So I guess my point being is, if International Women's Day this year is choose to challenge, maybe we should take that quite literally and we start challenging the forums, the formats that are coming out, or the way that companies are practicing. Because what I think is, as consumers, we have so much social power that we don't understand, that we should really tone into and say, this is not what we're okay with because of XYZ reasons. This is not cancel culture, this is accountability culture. And until we make companies, organizations and, corporates accountable, we're not going to have change. And then we're going to come another year later, have the same conversation, and there's going to be no progression. And I don't know about you, but if in 2021, to Priya's point, if 51% of the demographic are women and we still can't get gender right, then how do we have hope for all the other intersectional lenses that exist and are only growing? Very much, super passionate.
Absolutely wonderful, thank you. And it leads me, because I am just conscious of where we are with time, and I really do want to be able to go around the table on this. Is you've mentioned some really important things about the future, and it would be easy for me to say, so, if you were to go and ask yourself, if you were to go and give yourself a good talking to at the beginning of the pandemic, what would you have told yourself? But I would rather ask, I think, so what are you going to do for the next 12 months? So with that benefit of experience of the last 12, listening to, where we are as a society and where we think that we need to be building back, we know there are a lot of opportunities, for us to be able to tackle some of those bigger societal issues, by total inclusivity. What challenge will you set yourself for the next 12 months? And if I could ask if you could sort of keep it quite brief so that we can get around the table, I'd really appreciate that. I'm going to go to my top of my screen where I see. So I'm going to come to Sarah first, then Esther, then Priya, and then Sonia, if I may, and then I'll be able to just wrap up the panel, if I may. Sarah, over to you.
That's a big question. I think a challenge that I would like to take on, and that we've already started, is about listening. So instead of telling and deciding what engagement, inclusivity, diversity looks like, instead of deciding what a flexible workplace looks like, we've started doing a lot of polling with our office team, because everyone's remote, and saying, what do you want from the next year? What do you want from the next office? What would work for people? And I do this a lot in my other life, which is theatre and engagement, but I think it's not so common in companies. So I think the key takeaway for me from the pandemic is to listen, and with humanity, design something that works for a wide range of people and individuals, as well as the consensus, which is problematic.
Thank you. Esther.
I think for me, it's...
Esther's frozen on me a moment. I'm going to come... There we are. Sorry, there you are. You're back with me, Esther.
Oh, brilliant. So I think for me as a...
I think you're on mute.
Can you hear me now?
No, I've got a problem with Esther a moment. I'll just swap to Priya.
I think Esther's fine, Avril.
Avril, it might be your connection.
I beg your pardon. Go, Esther.
All right. So I think for me as a researcher, what will be really important is to spend less time on trying to see, demonstrating gaps, demonstrating the problem, and let's just get to what works. Let's get to what are the initiatives out there, and then let's try and test them. Let's see what works, when, in what context, tweak them, apply them, demonstrate their use. So we have seen enough on what is the value of diversity. We have seen enough on there is discrimination. How do we change it?
Lovely. Okay, thanks very much. Sonia, if I may?
Yes.
And then I'm going to finish with Priya.
So I think it's really important to lead by example. Of course, all the women in this room and those that we're talking about businesses and building better businesses. I believe the only way I can do that is if I set an example for the business that I'm about to build. So a great example being focus on your care. Care comes first. Are you okay to do the job? If not, do we need time out? That's cool. Culture, what kind of culture are you bending? I don't know about you, but I kind of want to work 3, maximum 4 days a week. And I'm not asking my team to do anything more. If the sun's out, go and play. Just get your work done where it needs to be. And the last is community. If anything, the pandemic has reminded us is lean into people. Ask for help. Don't be afraid to go and ask for support, but don't apologize when you do it. We have to come out of this like, sorry, this happened culture to, do you know what? It's okay to ask for support, and I'm going to find strength in it. And that's what
Absolutely.
I'm pledging.
Thank you. Last word for you, Priya, if I may.
Thank you, Avril. I mean, for me, my personal challenge is just about how do I take the best bits that I've seen from the pandemic? So the levelling up agenda, the focus on the conversation on mental health that Sonia's just been referring to there, the importance of community that Sonia's just talking about there, how we relate to our kids, our parents, our families, how do we actually celebrate the incredible success stories that we've heard today, the Women Innovation Awards, everything else that is good about what is happening. What we can all do is take those bits and make them a solid part of the future. And for me, that is just absolutely fundamental.
Thank you very much indeed. I think just really some closing remarks is first and foremost a huge thank you to all of my guest speakers this afternoon. You've been absolutely extremely insightful, very informative, and it's been an absolute pleasure to be able to talk with you. I think for me, the takeaways I take is there is huge enthusiasm. We are very much, individuals where the glass is half full, and we have to be able to capitalize on that. Just echoing, look after yourselves, look after those close to you, look after those that you don't maybe necessarily know. Just go do that knock on the door. But we have an opportunity. Society is changing, and we can make a difference. As the Minister for Science said this morning, boosting the number of female entrepreneurs could deliver £180 billion to the economy. Ladies, get those ideas, get working on those ideas, support one another. And there are plenty of networks, which I'm sure the KTN most certainly is one, and can signpost you to others that will be able to help you on your entrepreneurial journey. Ladies, thank you ever so much indeed. A real pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Avril, and also to our amazing panel, Priya, Sonia, Sarah, and Esther. We've got a very short networking break now, so we'll be back at 3:45 p.m. for our closing address with Lorena Robinson from Founders for Schools and our keynote speaker, Roberta Luca, co-founder of the BAFTA award-winning Bossa Studios. We'll see you after the break. In the meantime, keep the conversation going on Twitter with #WomenInnovate, network with other delegates, and have a well-deserved break. Thank you, everyone.